Today I'm building a Shadowbox clock. It features this beautiful cottonwood burl, a Shou Sugi Ban finished frame, and copper that I patinaed using K&S Precision Metals copper. Alright, a special thanks to K&S Precision Metals for sponsoring today's video. If you want to know more about this rack or any of the products they sell, do check out the link in the description. Alright, for the frame I'm going to use white oak. The frame is going to get a Shou Sugi Ban finish, and I like how the white oak looks with the Shou Sugi Ban finish on it. So when I burn it, I think it's going to look really good. Alright, oftentimes when you rip a wide board into narrower widths, the board sometimes warps as the tension is released. So I'm going to rip these boards about 1/4 of an inch wide, and then I'll joint and plane them square, and then rip them to their final width. So that way if there's any kind of movement, I have room to fix it. Alright, so I got them all squared up, so now I have the reset the fence to the exact width I want the pieces to be, and now I'll cut them to their final width. Alright, so I need to cut 2 dados in this, one to create a reveal to hold the burl in place, and the other one to create a reveal to hold the copper in place. So I'm going to start with the burl. And I've made a mark about 1/4 inch down from the top. I'm just going to bring the blade right up to that mark. All right. And then move the fence over. All right, all this sawdust that was flying up out of there was also flying up into my face, so I'm going to just put a piece of sandpaper here, fold it up in the slot to deflect that sawdust. Alright, reset for the next dado. Whenever I cut miters, I like to tip the blade to 45 opposed to tipping the miter gauge to 45, because trying to handle this miter gauge in the slot when you're starting out here and pushing through, sometimes you don't have enough of this bar in the miter slot to really make a stable cut. So I tip the blade to 45 instead, and leave this guy at 90. That way I have good support. But the problem with this guy is that I have 2 dados here, and the miter needs to go this way, so it has to sit in the table saw like this, so it's not sitting level. So to make sure it sits level, I've milled a piece of scrap wood that I can put in here to stack this on top of to make sure that it sits level, because that fills up that gap right there. So now I can put that scrap wood down and run it through the saw to cut the miters. So I'm going to cut one side, and then I'll set up a stop to cut the other side, so that way they're all the same. So I'm pretty much guaranteed, as long as this is at a perfect 45 and these are the exact same length all the way around, pretty much guaranteed that it's going to go together with tight miters. Alright, put my spacer block, but this time I'm going to have the front facing towards the blade. There, line up my pencil line with the miter cut in the fence. Adjust my stop. I'm going to clamp this straight edge down to my workbench. That way I have something to press against. All right, the glue dried overnight, and I'm gonna remove my tape. Now these miter joints aren't very strong, so I'm going to set up the table saw to cut some slots for some decorative keys in there. Once I put the Shou Sugi Ban finish on there, you won't really see those, but it'll still add quite a bit of strength to this joint. All right, so I have my shop-made jig here, and it's getting pretty well chewed up. So I have a piece of backer board to help prevent tear out. So I'm gonna drop that in there. And I'm gonna bring this to the center of the blade roughly. And then I'm just gonna set my piece in here and eyeball up, because I don't wanna cut through all the way. I just wanna cut a little bit, maybe 2/3 of the way through, a little more. All right, I'll just raise the blade up. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so I think 3/4 of an inch is going to be about right. Alright, so I sent these strips through the planer until I got down to a thickness that fits in there, and I just slowly snuck up on it, removing a little bit until I was happy with the fit. It's a nice, snug, tight fit. So now I'm just going to cut these into sections and glue them in there. Alright, I'm just going to use my Japanese pole saw to flush cut these guys off. Alright, so it's time to cut the Burl. So this Burl is left over from my jet engine project. This is a piece that was cut out where the jet engine actually sits in the table. So it's a piece of cottonwood, really nice, beautiful grain for the Burl. It's going to fit in here like this. So first, need to resaw this guy so that way I can put one down here and the other half up here, so that way I have this river of copper running through. So let's get this guy resawed. All right, this isn't exactly square, so I'm just going to square it up, and then we'll find the center and resaw with the bandsaw. All right, so I'm getting ready to do the Shou Sugi Ban finish, and I want to have a good glue bond here in the corner. So I'm laying out how I want my burls, and they're book matched. So they're going to sit in here like this. And even though this tape is going to get burned up a little bit when I do the Shou Sugi Ban finish, it won't be so much that it'll completely char the wood underneath. So it's just enough to give me enough clean surface for a good glue bond. All right, I'm ready to do the Shou Sugi Ban finish. Now I've seen a lot of failed Shou Sugi Ban finishes on YouTube. And a lot of that I think is because of a lack of understanding of what your objective is. Now Shou Sugi Ban finishes were typically used to protect the wood from the elements outside. The wind and rain didn't really penetrate that char. So if you're doing an outdoor project, you probably want to char it a little bit more than if you're doing an indoor project. If you're doing an indoor project, you're really just going for the look. So you just need to burn it just enough to get the look, not to do some super deep char. So on small projects like this, if you were going to use a ginormous flame source, you're probably going to burn this up, or the joints are going to come apart, or it's going to warp like crazy. So you want to use something a little more appropriately sized. And then also, you want to heat the wood evenly on both sides. If you char one side super hot and not do the other side super hot, this side is going to cook out more moisture than this side, and so it's going to warp. So know how deep of a char you want to go, what your particular circumstances you want, what kind of look you're going for, and heat it evenly and just burn it just enough to get the job done. All right, it's time to work on the back and patina the copper. All right, so the rack that K&S has comes with some standard size pieces, and their standard size pieces is smaller than what I want for this particular clock. So I looked online, and it turns out that they do sell larger pieces. So this guy is a 9x12 28 gauge, so that's what I'm going to use for the back of the clock. And then these smaller pieces I'm going to cut up to do some experimenting with. I want to try to get some nice color patinas, and the best way to do that is just to experiment and learn how to do it. So I'm going to cut this guy up and do some experiments on it. Now, if you've been following me on Instagram, you've seen some of the experimentations I went through, and I came up with some pretty cool colors, some bright reds and browns and blacks and things, but I really like the patterns. So I think I'm going to go with something with these two pieces to see what I can come up with for my final piece. Alright, to get the color reaction I want, which is in the reds and violets range, I'm going to use Borax. I'm going to mix it in this container of water to saturation. What I mean by saturation is to where it will no longer dissolve. All right, time to break out the K&S Precision Metals. Even though it's been in this protective plastic, I'm going to sand it to buff off any kind of oxidation that has occurred to it. All right, and then to create a little bit of a pattern, I'm going to get my copper wet. Then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of borax on there just to create some texture. That's a lot of sprinkle. We'll just dump that off. I'm going to get this saturated. So now for my safety speech. Most patina operations use some kind of change in temperature or adding in some kind of substance to create the reaction. That reaction is not always contained within the metal. It can create other liquids or gases as part of the reaction that can be dangerous. So whenever I do patinas, I fully research what type of reactions can occur to make sure I'm prepared for whatever happens. So I'm wearing my safety gear, my glasses, my respirator, heat-resistant clothing, as well as working within a ventilated area. I also have an appropriate size fire extinguisher on hand. So while I'm heating the metal, I am pointing the borax side away from me just in case hot soap pops off. So safety is always paramount when working in the shop, but I always level up when I'm doing patina work. All right, it's cooled off, so let's see what we got here. This is the back side. I think that's pretty cool. Now it did anneal it so it is soft, so it's bending pretty easy. So I'm going to carefully rinse off this and then we'll flatten it out. Alright, so the next step is to cut a backer board to size, about a 1/4 inch plywood here, and I'm going to glue the copper to this to give it some stability. Alright, normally I would use a neoprene contact adhesive to adhere copper to wood. It's a much stronger bond. This is a pretty light duty application, so I'm just going to use a little Super 77. That should be enough to hold it together once I get it in the frame. Of course, the tip's all plugged up. Alright, we'll let that tack up and then stick them together. Alright, let's see if I can get this thing together without screwing it up. So don't scratch it. So it's all different shapes and things. It's kind of hard to find exactly where you think center is. So I'm just kind of going to sweep the hand around and see how I like how it fits everywhere. So I think that's probably looks like a good spot, taking into account that there's going to be a frame overlap there. Alright, so there's my clock piece, and I just need to drill a hole in that guy, so 5/16. Alright, so to be able to access the battery from the back, I need to drill out a hole. So I'm going to use this hole saw. And to locate that hole saw, so set this guy right here in the corner. A little arc. Alright, so now I need to route out a pocket for this to sit in so that it goes all the way through. So I'm going to put some double stick tape down, or some blue tape so I can get the double stick tape off. Then I got this guy jig I made to fit perfectly around there. And now I'll use a pattern bit in the router to route out that pocket. Alright, so I finished all the parts with a gloss finish, gloss lacquer, and I don't want the frame to be gloss, but I still wanted to seal it in since this is an indoor project. I didn't want any black soot to get on anything else in the house. So I'm just going to buff the sheen down with some steel wool. So I have a nice matte finish instead of a gloss, but it'll still be nice and sealed. I'll let that wax dry up, and in the meantime, what's remaining of the blue tape, I'm going to get a razor blade and scrape that off of there. Right. I think a chisel will be more effective than a razor blade. And yes, I'm sure this is dulling my chisel, but I'm not too worried. I can sharpen them up easy enough. Alright, so this can still expand and contract. I'm only going to glue the bottom corner. And since this is going to be kind of a hard thing to clamp, I'm going to tack it in place with a couple of headless brads. Or pin nails, really. So this is a picture framing tool. It basically shoots a little arrow in here, some little tabs into the wood to prevent the back from coming out. Alright, so these clock hands are just a press fit. Alright, and this second hand is a little bit too long, so I'm just going to trim it off. Alright, there is our completed clock, and a special thanks to K&S Precision Metals for helping me out with this project.